Hello everyone. Welcome back to another video of server administering series of Dev with Deb. In this video I'm going to introduce you to the concept of group policy. One of the great benefits of using domain networking is the fact that the domain allows you to apply various configuration settings, such as security settings, across multiple Windows hosts within the domain using group policy. So let's spend a few minutes looking at what group policy is and how it works. First of all, let's talk about what a policy is. A policy is a set of configuration settings. Policies can be applied to domain users as well as to domain computers. Essentially, we're able to push down configuration settings from the domain controller to individual hosts within the domain. This is really beneficial because it prevents you, as the administrator, from having to go from system to system to system to system to system, making the same configuration change over and over and over. Collections of policies are grouped together and stored in a group policy object, GPO. GPOs are very powerful. They contain a collection of settings that can be applied to all the different hosts in the domain, such as registry settings, running scripts, applying templates, setting up software, making configuration settings, and so on. An example is shown here. In this screenshot, we're editing the GPO named the default domain policy. And notice that within this policy we have a tree structure, over here, in which our group policy settings are stored. In this example, if we walk our way down the tree, we're going from computer configuration to policies, to Windows settings, to security settings, to account policies, and within account policy, we have a group of policies that are related to passwords. The individual policies are shown over here. For example, notice that we can enforce password history. You'll notice that the policy is shown right here, and then the policy setting is shown over here. In this case, enforce password history is enabled and 24 passwords will be remembered, meaning that the end user has to use 24 unique passwords before they'll be allowed to reuse a password that they'd used before. Notice we also have a policy for setting the maximum password age. In other words, how long can the user use the same password before they're going to be forced to change it? Right now, that's set to 42 days. Also, we have a minimum password age set for 1 day. The minimum password length is currently set to 7 characters. Password complexity is also enabled. Also notice that storing passwords using reversible encryption is disabled, which is a very good idea. If you ever see this policy turned on, you'd better have a good reason for doing it, because it makes your user accounts much less secure. We'll talk about how that works in a different lesson. So, with this configuration, whenever a domain joined workstation powers on, these settings that are configured right here are going to be automatically pushed down from the domain controller to that workstation. Therefore, on each individual workstation, these various password policy settings are going to be automatically configured. You don't have to go from system to system to system throughout the network, manually making these same changes over and over and over. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand 2 important concepts. First of all, any computer running Windows that is not joined to a domain will use local group policy settings. For example, its local security settings will be configured by the local security policy. That means if you have a bunch of computers on your network that aren't part of a domain, you're going to have to go from system to system to system to set up the various policy settings on each individual system, which, as you might guess, requires a lot of work. On the other hand, if your computers are joined to a domain, then both the group policy settings from the domain as well as the local group policy settings will be applied. For example, both security settings from the domain group policy as well as security settings in the local group policy will be applied. But the group policy settings from the domain will take precedence over any local settings. For example, if you have the same security settings configured in group policy, in the domain, and in the local group policy, then the settings from the domain will take precedence over the same setting that you configured in the local security policy on the local system. Just remember that domain group policy settings always trump local group policy settings. Now, policies within a group policy object are divided into 2 different categories. First, we have computer configuration, and second, we have user configuration. You might be asking what the difference is between a computer configuration policy and a user configuration policy. A computer configuration policy is applied to the computer itself, meaning that no matter who logs into the computer, these settings right here are going to be applied. Group policy does not care who the individual user is. Some sample computer policies include software that should be installed on the computer, scripts that might need to be run when the system boots or shuts down, password restrictions that are going to be applied to all the user accounts on the system, also network security settings or registry settings that are going to be applied to the entire computer. The important thing to remember about computer configuration policies is the fact that they are applied as the system boots up and initially connects to the domain. They are enforced before any user actually logs on. User policies, on the other hand, are enforced for specific users. Therefore, it doesn't matter which computer the user logs in from, those policies will be applied. Accordingly, different policies can be set for different users. For example, you may have one computer system that 3 different users use. Using user policies, different settings can be applied based upon the user configuration policy set up for the individual user account. Some sample user policy settings could include the software that's installed for a specific user, scripts for a specific user that are run at log on or log off. It might also include security settings for your web browser. It could even be used to push down a list of favorites for your web browser. It can also be used to push down registry settings that apply just to that individual user. Just remember that the key difference between user policies and computer policies is the fact that user policies are applied on a per-user basis. Therefore, they're not applied until the user actually logs on, whereas computer configuration policies are applied to the entire computer system no matter who logs on, and are therefore applied when the system initially boots up. There are literally hundreds of different configuration settings that can be applied through group policy, and we can't possibly cover all of them here. However, there are a few key ones that you should probably be familiar with. First, we have account policies. We use account policies to control such things as password settings, account lockout settings, Kerberos settings, and so on. Next, we have local policies/audit policy. You use the audit policy settings to configure auditing for various events, such as log on, account management, or privilege use. Next, we have local policies/user rights assignment. User rights determine what actions a given user can perform on a given computer. We also have local policies/security policies. Security policies are used to allow such things as allowing a user to install an unsigned driver or requiring Ctrl-Alt-Delete to be pressed in order to log on. We can also configure registry policies. You can use registry policies to configure specific registry keys and values. They can also specify whether or not you can read or even change a specific registry value. Another set of group policies affect the file system. You can use file system policies to configure file and folder permissions that apply to multiple computers. We also have software restriction policies. You can use software restriction policies to define what software is allowed to run on any computer that's joined to the domain. These software restriction policies can be applied to a specific user, or they can be applied globally to all users. Finally, we have administrative templates. Administrative templates are registry-based settings that you can configure within a group policy object. These are really useful. I use them all the time. Instead of editing the registry or making various configuration changes in control panel individually on every single computer in your network, you can use the settings under administrative templates within group policy to control the computer configuration, and therefore, centrally manage the user experience. For example, you can use administrative templates to enable and configure various Windows features, such as BitLocker, offline files, or even parental controls. You can also use administrative templates to do pretty cool things like customizing the start menu, customizing the taskbar, or even setting up the desktop environment. That's it for this video. In this video we talked about group policy. We first talked about what group policy is and how policies can be used to push down configuration settings to all the computers in your domain. We talked about the relationship between group policy and local policy settings that may be configured on individual machines. We then looked at the difference between computer configuration policies and user configuration policies. And then we ended this lesson by reviewing a list of policies that you should probably be familiar with in order to effectively manage a domain. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure you give a like and subscribe to my channel.